The President, the Congress, and U.S. abortion policy. Mr. Clinton proposes that taxpayers resume funding some abortions for some low-income Americans. In Florida, a final report on the boat crash that killed 2 Major League pitchers. Was the driver under the influence? And Eye on America. Tonight, babies, jobs, and the mommy track. Why so many women are choosing to fight back.
It's legally wrong to discriminate on the basis of pregnancy. I think there are a lot of people who think that there's nothing wrong with it morally.
This is the CBS Evening News. Good evening. Dan Rather reporting. President Clinton is delivering on one campaign promise to lift the 16-year-old ban on federal funding for most abortions for poor people. All sides in the abortion debate are bracing for fast and furious reaction. White House correspondent Susan Spencer reports on the impact of the change, medical and political.
This Philadelphia clinic helps pay for abortions for poor women because for 16 years the federal government has refused to do so. For some, the clinic policy makes a big difference.
I didn't have no money. There would be no way that I could be able to afford it.
As promised in the campaign, Mr. Clinton's new budget would change the rules, reversing the long-standing ban that has stopped almost all federal funds for abortions.
You've had the federal government flat out prohibiting states from spending the money to pay for abortions, whether or not they're medically necessary, whether or not they result from a case of rape, whether or not they result from a case of incest. The president feels that that goes too far.
Abortion rights groups are delighted.
This nation must no longer have a two-tier system that denies poor women access to basic reproductive health care.
About a dozen states do pick up the tab for poor women, but polls show Americans far more reluctant to fund abortions than to allow them. A CBS News New York Times survey last year found 80% saying abortion should be permitted under some circumstances, but a majority was against using tax dollars to pay for them. The White House admits it doesn't know how much paying would cost or how many Medicaid abortions there might be, but disputes opponents' estimates of up to 1 million.
I think this will compel and coerce millions of people whose consciences are violated by this to participate in the killing of the unborn.
The move adds to the frustration of the anti-abortion community, which has watched this president systematically dismantle gains they made with friendlier White Houses. After the recent murder of a Florida doctor who performed abortions and the almost routine attacks on clinics, arsonists torched this Montana facility only yesterday, some expect this decision to lead to more trouble.
I would say the more that the laws are, that rights are taken away from pro-life activists, some people on the fringe will commit violent acts. I would say the abortionists should be prepared for that.
The White House is certainly prepared for a tough fight and knows that this may be only the beginning. Ahead is the still bigger question of where abortion fits into health care reform, which is hardly lacking in controversy already. Dan?
Susan, politically, this could be risky business. Why is the president doing it now?
It is a political risk. The optimists here point out that this is perhaps one of the most socially liberal Congresses to come along in some time. And secondly, if you look at the votes in Congress over the last few years on this question, it's gotten tighter and tighter. They think they have a shot at it. It is a risk. It was also a campaign promise, and Mr. Clinton likes to keep those when he can.
Susan Spencer, live at the White House. Thanks. The U.S. abortion debate went transatlantic today and spilled over to Britain. CBS News correspondent Barry Peterson has the story over there.
A familiar scene in an unfamiliar setting. Abortion activists confronting police, not in America's heartland, but in London's sedate Regent's Park. The focus of the protest, the world headquarters of International Planned Parenthood. The charge against demonstrators from both sides was disturbing the peace in a royal park. Police cleared the area in minutes. The protesters took to the streets hoping to support or denounce this man, anti-abortion Rescue America leader Don Treshman. He was on primetime television last night, drumming up support for his crusade.
We've lost worldwide 130 million children to this horror of abortion, and we're just asking for our friends here to join us to fight one more Holocaust.
But instead of leading an anti-abortion campaign, he was led away by police for deportation back to America. He plans to appeal. What the Americans underestimated is the fact that the British have virtually no tolerance for the sort of curbside confrontation so often seen in the United States. It doesn't matter which side of the abortion debate is trying to start trouble. The British strategy is to step in and stop it fast.
I don't think that the British public will stand for this sort of behaviour. And I don't think that abortion or family planning is either a political or a social issue in this country.
The American anti-abortionists hope to open a new front in Britain in the battle against abortion. Instead, the message from British authorities is, Yankee, go home. Barry Peterson, CBS News, London.
U.S. Secretary of State Warren Christopher talked a hard line today on Iran, Iraq, and Libya. Appearing before Congress, Christopher called Iran an international outlaw. About Iraq, he said the U.S. goal is the removal of Saddam Hussein. And Christopher said the U.S. will call for a worldwide oil embargo against Libya for refusing to turn over the accused bombers of Pan Am Flight 103. In the World Trade Center bombing, investigators say they now have what they call convincing evidence that links one of the arrested suspects to a letter claiming responsibility for the bombing. The letter was signed, quote, Liberation Army 5th Battalion, and police reportedly have found that same name in computer notes taken from one of the suspects. In Central Texas, new talks today with members of that armed religious group still holed up and defiant in their compound. Only now the talks aren't with federal agents on the phone, but with a lawyer on the scene. Correspondent Vicki Mabry reports on the standoff in Waco, day 31.
Unlike the outsiders who try slipping past federal agents to get inside the Branch Davidian compound and meet cult leader David Koresh, Houston attorney Dick DeGuerin had the FBI's blessing for his meeting with Koresh today. DeGuerin, who was hired by Koresh's mother to represent her son, sat outside the compound yesterday for 2 hours, talking to Koresh through the front door. Today he was back for 2 additional meetings, this time inside, face-to-face with his client.
I really can't discuss what I'm saying, what they're saying, anything. I'm very hopeful. They want to tell their story. My client wants everybody to be safe, and so do I, and we've got a very tight schedule.
It was the first time officials have allowed an outsider access to the compound, saying this may be what is needed to move negotiations forward.
We are cautiously optimistic that this will be one of the significant events necessary to bring this to final resolution.
3 weeks ago, DeGuerin and Koresh's mother, Bonnie Haldeman, sat at a government blockade, trying to force the FBI to let them in to see the cult leader. The government said no. But after Koresh refused for 4 days last week to answer negotiators' calls, he finally came to the phone Sunday and asked to meet with his lawyer.
We have agreed to complete confidentiality and are treating the conversations that he has with Mr. Koresh as privileged.
Neither the attorney nor the FBI will give specifics about DeGuerin's face-to-face meetings with Koresh, except to say that they're substantive talks about law, not scripture. Federal agents say they'll decide on a meeting-by-meeting basis whether the discussions are moving toward a resolution. If not, they say they'll be discontinued. Vicki Mabry, CBS News, Waco.
Straight ahead on tonight's CBS Evening News, the results of alcohol tests on 2 big league ball players killed in a boating accident. And the Oscar, a long time coming. In federal court in Los Angeles, a doctor testified today that injuries to Rodney King's face were more likely caused by a fall to the pavement than by blows from a club. The doctor was a witness for the defense in the trial of 4 Los Angeles police officers accused of violating King's civil rights. Florida police announced their findings today in the investigation of baseball's spring training tragedy. The victims were prominent, but as correspondent Reed Gillen reports, it was an all-too-common type of boating accident in the Sunshine State.
3 pitchers were conspicuously absent today on the Cleveland Indians practice field. A week after a boating accident killed players Steve Olin and Tim Cruz and seriously injured Bob Ojeda, authorities said there was a 4th and deadly presence in that boat, alcohol. They had been drinking. Tim Cruz was driving with a blood alcohol content of 0.14%, 40% over the limit.
At that point, you are legally intoxicated, which your facilities are impaired, where you can't operate a boat safely.
Apparently, the boat never slowed before plowing into a dock on this central Florida lake. Last year in Florida, 81 people were killed in boating accidents, more than any other state, and more than a third of such incidents involved alcohol. The legal limit of intoxication may be the same on the water as it is on the road, but people's expectations are different. Boating is supposed to be fun and escape. And many a boater who wouldn't get behind the wheel of a car after drinking would sooner forget their life jacket than their six-pack.
They view it as their fun and their last frontier, that they can go out and just party in and have a good time and not be bothered.
The penalties for driving a boat under the influence in Florida are the same as for a car, except that there is no license to be taken away. And there are no seat belts, airbags, or crash-tested bumpers. No speed limits or traffic signals. It's all left to the good judgment of the operator. The sad irony in this tragedy was that though all three men in the speeding boat had been drinking, the only one found to be legally intoxicated was the designated driver. Reed Galen, CBS News, Miami.
Stay here with us for a CBS Evening News reality check on pork and the workings of Washington. A senator demands budget cuts, but still spends plenty in his own home state.
That we are not doing a good enough job in putting criminals.
The future belongs to the young, but its promise rests in all our hands today. At SeaWorld and Busch Gardens, we're working for a brighter tomorrow. By establishing the Busch Wildlife Preserve and the SeaWorld Research Institute, we're moving to preserve that which has been given to us in trust. At Anheuser-Busch, we realize if we're to make way for the generations to come, we must all work to preserve what we have today.
When you suffer from allergies, you desperately want the relief a doctor can give you. The powerful relief you get from Tavist One. And now Tavist One is available without a prescription. Just 1 milligram of its potent antihistamine relieves your worst allergy symptoms for 12 straight hours. Tavist One and Tavist D. 1 tablet, 12 hours, and now no prescription.
When Ford refined the full-size car, we made its shape more aerodynamic. Its V8 engine more powerful and yet more efficient. We also added to its comfort and even its safety with available anti-lock brakes and dual airbags. But through it all, one thing about the Ford Crown Victoria has remained the same. It's still as quiet as a Rolls-Royce.
Have you driven a Ford lately?
If you're arrested, you'll get a lawyer even if you can't pay. Does that mean you'll get justice? An all-new 48 Hours, Wednesday.
A survey out today says consumer confidence in the U.S. economy fell again in March, down for the third month in a row. Most Americans apparently are still worried about jobs. The U.S. Senate today defeated attempts to cut back President Clinton's $16 billion plan to create some jobs. One key opponent, Republican Phil Gramm of Texas, called the bill, and I quote, nothing but good old-fashioned pork barrel. Well, when it comes to pork, there are those who say Senator Gramm is pretty good at feeding off the public trough. Correspondent Eric Ingberg has tonight's CBS Evening News reality check.
Add up the spending, add up the taxes. Is that the change we want?
No one rails against big federal spending more than Senator Phil Gramm, whether he's sponsoring the Gramm-Rudman law or keynoting the Republican convention.
The change Republicans want today is to stop the growth of government.
Now, Gramm is point man for the GOP assault on the Clinton economic plan.
Kill the $16 billion economic stimulus package because it is total pork barrel.
Time out. Pork is in the eyes of the beholder, and Gramm works overtime pouring federal dollars into Texas, even as he heaps acid rhetoric on big spending. It's an old Washington story.
Ask these goats. Gramm and other senators from ranch states saw to it that Texas goat ranchers hung on to generous federal subsidies for wool and mohair. A $100 million a year handout the new administration wants to shear. Then there's the Plant Stress Laboratory at Texas Tech. Gramm co-sponsored this project, not to psychoanalyze plants, but help them cope with global warming. Cost $1 million this year alone.
When we have set out an amount we spend on ag research, Is it not my job to try to get research in Texas? It is.
Two of the biggest federal research projects ever, the Texas-based space station and the Super Collider, have survived fierce opposition over the years, in part because budget-minded Graham is for them. And when a school for prosecutors in Houston wanted a new building, Graham came through with $500,000 taxpayer dollars.
That sounds like a classic piece of pork barrel politics.
I believe that we are not doing a good enough job in putting criminals in prison.
To the senator who has sent out $3.5 million worth of franked mail over the years to tout his conservative views, there's nothing hypocritical about any of this.
I'm going to work for tight budgets. I'm going to work to reduce spending. But once those spending levels are set, I'm going to fight to see that Texas gets its share.
Multiply Graham by 535 and you have a picture of how the Washington game is played. Even the loudest voices for spending cuts see a political duty to defend and expand, when possible, the dollars heading their way. Eric Engberg, CBS News, Washington.
The U.S. government today approved a new 4-in-1 combination vaccine for infants, offering them protection with fewer shots. The vaccine, called Tetramune, will protect infants against diphtheria, tetanus, whooping cough, and the leading cause of meningitis. Coming up next, Eye on America. Tonight, women who say motherhood cost them their jobs. In corporate America, they call it the mommy track. It means less demanding, lower paying jobs for women who take time out to bear and raise children. Many women resent it, especially when the mommy track turns out to be the end of the line. Bob Fall reports on business, babies, and bias in tonight's Eye on America.
Not on the floor, in your mouth.
Her triplets keep Joan Levine hopping these days, but she's not as busy as she'd hoped. Her maternity leave ended and she wanted to return to her supervisor's job at a New York ad agency. The agency had given her job to someone else.
I mean, if I was a man recuperating with a broken leg, that position would have been held.
Now suing the company, Joan Levine is part of a national phenomenon. According to one study, women who take maternity leave are 10 times more likely than other disabled workers to lose their jobs.
It's legally wrong to discriminate on the basis of pregnancy. I think there are a lot of people who think that there's nothing wrong with it morally.
Listen to this conversation secretly recorded by an employee who has just told her boss she's pregnant.
We're not able to keep you here till March because it upsets our business.
Because I'm pregnant?
Sure. One of the reasons why we hired you. Not the reason. One of the reasons why we hired you is because you're not going to be pregnant for 2 years.
Well, so it happened.
So it happened. But that's your fault, not our fault.
That's flat out illegal, but employers do have legitimate concerns.
People anticipate problems, and the worst of it, of course, is falling into the stereotype that we're going to make all these plans, make all these arrangements, she's going to take the leave, say she's coming back, and not return.
Studies show the vast majority do return. What many find, though, is that they've been demoted, shunted aside from the fast track they'd been on to a lesser or kind of mommy track. That kind of discrimination is very subtle and very tough to prove.
Lisa Buxbaum was an ad agency vice president when her son Jonathan was born. Even though she'd been on the fast track, Lisa felt slighted when she returned to work because she didn't get the same raise everyone else in her unit received, and because she felt she was treated differently.
And in front of all these people, my boss turned to me and said, "Lisa, do you have to excuse yourself now?" And then turned to the men and said, "Lisa's still nursing her baby. When are you going to wean that child anyway?" And it was kind of humiliating.
She threatened to sue, and the company, which until then had regarded her as the model employee, decided to fire her for reasons, it says, totally unrelated to pregnancy. Patty Ransom is Director of Human Resources at Lisa's old agency.
And I think that she became consumed with the idea of not getting an increase. It bothered her for a long time. It built up in her, and it eventually affected her performance.
Oh, thank you.
Adele Ambrose's experience was altogether different. Her company, AT&T, gives new mothers up to 1 year off and guarantees them their old job or a comparable one.
I had really a worry-free, completely
joyful maternity leave because I knew that I had a job to come back to that I wanted to come back to, and I think there is a whole loyalty issue there.
AT&T did a complete about-face in its maternity policy after being forced to pay $66 million 2 years ago to employees charging pregnancy discrimination. AT&T says the new policy works smoothly.
Because people are going to have to pick up some of the work that's left behind, but it is not so disruptive that, we can't get through it and get through it fine.
Many new mothers, though, are finding that they can't. Lisa Bucksbaum's suit got so expensive she had to drop it. Joan Levine, whose suit is dragging on, says she was devastated.
You got off the phone saying, I can't believe they did this to me. You see it happen to other people, but I walked right into it.
A new federal law is supposed to ensure that women like that will get their old jobs back. What many working mothers have learned, however, is that when it comes to their careers, when they get pregnant, they could be playing Russian roulette. In Basking Ridge, New Jersey, this is Bob Fall for Eye on America.
All things come, said the poet Longfellow, to him who will but wait. From Hollywood, Bill Lagatuda has the story of two good fellows who waited a long time.
The official theme of the Oscar show last night was the Year of the Woman, but they should have called it the Year of the Payback.
Al Pacino in Scent of a Woman.
Al Pacino, who'd been overlooked at these events 7 times before, finally got what he deserved, the Oscar for Best Actor. And even Pacino seemed to know it was about time.
You broke my streak.
Just when I thought I was out, they pulled me back in.
There were so many times he might well have won, but never did.
Are you blind?
It took a blind man dancing the tango to make Hollywood finally right its wrongs.
I wonder how I would have reacted if I didn't get it this time. I don't know.
Go ahead. Make my day.
It was also a night to recall that another huge star had been around a long, long time and neglected. For all his popularity and talent, Clint Eastwood had never been nominated.
Clint Eastwood.
Last night he won 2 Oscars, one for Best Director.
This is pretty good. This is all right. Yeah.
It's a hell of a thing, killing a man. You take away all he's got, and all he's ever gonna have.
And for producing the Best Picture of the year, the epic Western in which he renounced the violence that made him a star, Eastwood got his other statuette.
We've grown up with a lot of nameless people shot off of buildings and out of the saddle, and for all of a sudden to have it mean something when characters die was something I wasn't sure what the public would like, but I figured, what the hell, you got to take a swing at it.
As usual, the Oscar show itself was a bit of a yawner. No real surprises, and boy was it ever long. But it did have its moments.
You killed everyone, 'cause you're the star. Come here, you big mayor, you.
Not the least of which were when Hollywood seemed to say, sorry, we made you wait so long. Bill Lagatuda, CBS News, Hollywood.
And that's part of our world tonight. Dan Rather reporting for the CBS Evening News. See you tomorrow. Good night.
Experience CBS News.